Welcome back. We're talking cashless societies, and joining me again is Brett Scott. He's the author of this book, CloudMoney, Cash, Cards, Crypto, and the War for Our Wallets. Thanks again, Brett, for joining me. Just before we went to commercial break, you enlightened me that actually people are not forced and obliged to take cash if you're, say, purchasing something. You were going to give an example as to why, when, in what context, cash has to be accepted.
Sure. I mean, the basic rule is that if you're in debt to somebody, they have to take legal tender in that situation. All right. So I mean, a very kind of if you want a lighthearted example of this, I was staying in a hotel in Sweden, and they refused my cash at the bar. All right, but I wasn't in debt in that situation, so they could refuse it. But what I went and did is I went up to the hotel room and I just drank the beers out of the minibar. All right. Now I was in their debt. And so I went down to the hotel cashier the next day, or the reception, and said, okay, now I'm going to pay my bill. And they said, well, we don't take your cash. And I said, well, now I'm in your debt. You have to take my cash. And in that situation, what they actually did was they just let me off. They just gave it to me for free. And so that's what happens if you
had a good night on the house.
Sure, yeah. So that's the kind of like dynamics of legal tender. But obviously, each case is discussed in court and so on.
Okay, so let's get into some of the nitty gritty. You reference big tech, big finance, and I assume this is part of the reason why. Why is a cashless society? Why is this such a concern, or why should people be just wary, or not even wary, but paying attention? Why should they be interested in this?
Sure. I mean, one of the sort of core metaphors I often use, if I want to quickly just explain to somebody why this is important, is there's nothing inherently wrong with digital payments, right? What's the problem comes when you can only use digital payments. And the metaphor you want to think about is, imagine a situation where you could only use Uber for transport, all right? So there's total Uberification of the transport system. And you couldn't use bicycles, for example. That most people would intuitively understand that that's an incredibly dangerous situation for surveillance, ability for Uber to control you, for resilience of your system, for numerous reasons. And actually, in a transport system, you'd maintain numerous different types of transport. And it's similar with monetary systems. It's fine, to have your apps and stuff on this, as one part of it. But as soon as you get rid of the cash system, the balance of power is totally disturbed, and you have total Uberification of payments. And that leads to problems of surveillance, problems of economic censorship, huge resilience problems in your system. Your system can just go down. You have big exclusion problems. A lot of people can't use those systems. And there's a centralization of power more generally.
So are we kind of heading towards that one style system where it's only digital because, we've been introduced to now digital payment? We thought, oh, this is far more convenient. So, cash is kind of being rendered useless in a sense, like nobody's using cash. Is that what's happening there, or is there something a little bit more orchestrated behind the scenes?
Yeah, so there's two sort of separate questions here. One question is a cashless society bad? All right, I'd say yes. Then there's a second thing, which is, how has it come to be? Why are we moving to a cashless society? The typical story is that somehow it's driven from the bottom up, that it's the ordinary people are just demanding this and so on. And then there's a sort of a counter narrative, which people like me offer, which to rebalance that story, to say, actually, there's many top-down pushes against the cash system, both from big corporates, but also from states. This is what's sometimes referred to as the war on cash. All right, these different types of top-down pushes against the cash system. But you can zoom out even further, and you can sort of look at, just general sort of, corporate players. They love acceleration and expansion, right? Think about Amazon. Amazon wants to spread across the entire world. It hates sort of small-scale, human-scale systems like cash because it can't automate it. All right. So at the very top level, big corporates like Amazon hate it, but of course the banking sector hates it because it competes with their own systems. Visa and MasterCard hate cash because they don't make any money when you're using cash. And some governments also increasingly don't like cash for various reasons. But there's a bunch of different players who actually have an agenda against the cash system. And this interacts then with how ordinary people on the streets end up seeing cash. So over time, they slowly get told that there's something shameful about using it, that they're behind the times if they're still using cash and so on.
Well, during COVID, we were told that it would increase the spread of COVID viruses, and we should avoid cash.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's total misinformation. And in reality, actually, when studies were done, it showed that many of the technologies associated with automation, so for example, self-checkout counters where you're touching the screen the supermarket, those had far higher danger of spreading viruses than cash does, actually. Even holding just the trolley handles in supermarkets, right? So all this stuff about cash somehow being a unique vector via which COVID would spread was pretty bogus, although many people had internalized that story for a long time, right?
Yes.
Many people just had this idea. So
okay, I'm going to pause you there. I'm going to pause you there. We got to cut to commercial. Sorry to do that again, and we'll be right back.
No worries.